Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to let a few people in and we'll get started in a moment. Well, it's 10 o'clock, right on the hour here. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Sharon Jones, and I'm the founder and CEO of Nonprofit Solutions Matter. So excited that you all are tuning in today for what I believe is just going to be a very impactful conversation, particularly for your organizations that are looking to diversify your funding. Many of our constituents, we have probably about 37,000 newsletter subscribers. We decided from hearing from you all to bring some really amazing content to help you scale your nonprofit, help you to look at sort of your infrastructure, your ROI on your events. So we've been bringing you some really great individuals to come in and talk about various ways that you can diversify your revenue, but more importantly, build sustainable nonprofit. Our guest today is Patrick Schmitt. He is the co-founder and co-CEO of FreeWill. If you haven't heard of FreeWill, Google it. It's an amazing organization. It's one of the nation's largest leading technology platforms that helps nonprofit unlock transformational giving through planned gifts and non-cash sets. So many of you probably like, what's the gift and how do we get non-cash assets? Well, today you're going to find out. Patrick is at the forefront of one of the most important shifts that's happening in the philanthropic world today. It's the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in history. While many organizations continue to focus primarily on annual giving, Patrick has helped more than 2,400 nonprofits rethink what's possible by leveraging bequests, stocks, and donor advised funds. Also, our IRA gifts and other forms of charitable giving that is often has the power to transform your organization. So many of you, just think about bequests, the wills, and those kinds of things, but we'll do a deep dive into what are these instruments and how you can tap in. Under Patrick's leadership, Free Will has helped nonprofits partners generate more than 14 billion with a B billion in planned giving commitments, giving him a unique perspective on philanthropy and where it's heading. In this really, I believe that we're kind of under attack in the nonprofit sector. Patrick is known for challenging conventional fundraising wisdom with powerful ideas. One of his famous quotes is planned giving is the most underused leverager or lever in fundraising. Today, we'll discuss the coming generational wealth transfer, why nonprofits that need to focus on that, and really focus on how we can really leverage this work. Patrick, welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so excited to have you here.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. Really excited to be here. And thanks for everything you're doing.
You're more than welcome. Start with just background. Tell you how you got involved in this, how long you've been working in the nonprofit sector, and why you have such a passion for what you do.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I think I've been uh, in this field, or at least sort of really attuned to philanthropy for as long as I can remember. When I was growing up, we used to get 50 cents for allowance, and 10 cents of that had to go to church. And then later, we get a dollar for allowance, and 10 cents had to go to church, and 10 cents had to go to another charity that we got to pick out. And that's been true for so long. And so I've been fortunate to be in and around nonprofit and political fundraising for a while. Was very lucky to run email fundraising for President Obama for a couple of years after he was first elected. And one of the things we did there was just, test things every day. We are incredibly fortunate to have 11 million subscribers on the email list, which is more than basically any nonprofit. And so, on a Monday, we would try 10 different things to 100,000 people each, and then whatever one, we would send it on Tuesday. And so we got to learn so much and experiment to a degree that we were just very fortunate to be able to. And then 10 years ago, I was a student at Stanford's Graduate School of Business with a real focus on social innovation. I met my now co-founder, Jenny Shias-Bradling, who's wonderful, and thought Jenny was just the smartest person I'd ever met. And so pitched her on the idea for Free Will. I had been thinking about fundraising for a while, and I thought, why have we spent so much time trying to make it easy for you to give $8, but it's hard to give 800,000? That doesn't make sense. And so pitched Jenny. Jenny said, let's give it at least a try. And we ran some experiments. We tried things out. Immediately, people tried to give $100,000 to St. Jude's, and we said, okay, we have something. And that was 10 years ago. And so we've been working together ever since. And now we have a wonderful team of 250 plus all around the world.
That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So, Patrick, like, tell me kind of a little bit about what you sense that's happening in the nonprofit sector today. Like, where you find the pain points? Where do you feel that people need to shift their focus?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting. I mean, one of the things that's just true about the nonprofit sector, which is frankly true of a lot of sectors, is there's more to do than time to do it. And so having real clarity of prioritization and understanding what actually moves the needle is more important than ever. There's just so many things you can do, right? There's keeping up with your social media, keeping up with your LinkedIn, doing all your annual giving, doing your monthly giving, doing your major donors, doing your stewardship, et cetera. And so we really try to focus on what are the areas that really, really matter? And for us, it's really two things, maybe three, but one is planned giving. And we're sitting at the dawn of the great wealth transfer, where 124 trillion with a capital T will be transferred over the next 20 years to other boomers, to Gen X, to millennials, to Gen Z, but also a lot of that's charity. And so that's going to be an incredibly important topic, and we can talk more about that in a moment. And then also these gifts of assets, right? Of stock, of IRA giving, donor advised funds are exploding, as I'm sure you and your listeners know. And the research shows that the folks who take non-cash assets actually grow 6 times faster. And so some of the really important work is getting comfortable with that. And the secret is it's not that hard. But a lot of folks don't come from a finance background or an econ background, so they're not really sure how to talk about it. But it's just not as challenging as people might think. And once they take the first step, they tend to have a lot of success.
So, in your work, do you do coaching with those resource development professionals that don't even know how to begin to have that conversation with one of their donors?
So we do a lot of training. We do training for free every Tuesday or every other Tuesday, depending on the month. We hold webinars. People can always go check them out. If you go to freewill.com/nonprofits, you can find out the next one. We're doing one on this coming Tuesday for faith organizations. We just did one on Make a Will Month. We did one recently on how to fundraise in an election year. But we always do a lot of trainings, and then we also we provide a lot of technology to help people give stock gifts and also receive stock gifts and make planned gifts and receive planned gifts, et cetera. So we really try to make the most important type of giving as easy as possible on the nonprofit, but also as easy as possible on the donor, which is incredibly important. Otherwise, it just won't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just finding that, first of all, your content is great. And I think it's really helpful that people then bringing this to people today so they can have an understanding that they don't have to pay for this. You don't have to be a rocket science to really start the process. I think it's really important to begin to think about what are some other ways to raise money from the nonprofits. So many are just struggling, as you know, because they just think linear, like maybe one or two different things that you pointed out before. So with that said, how do you help them navigate through the bureaucracy within their own organizations? For instance, I mean, I run a nonprofit and I have a board. So, what does that look like?
I think, in some cases, boards can be blockers to change. In some cases, we're also seeing boards being the catalyst because the math is so easy. And a lot of it is helping people understand where is the actual money. And so, an extremely small percentage of net worth in America is held in cash, but that tends to be what everyone asks for. But the actual wealth is in stocks, it's in IRA giving, it's in real estate, right? It's in donor advised funds are now exploding. And that's where the actual revenue is. That's where the money is. And so once people start to understand that, they say, oh, well, why am I asking for money in this tiny sliver of the pie when, stocks and securities might be incredibly important? And real
Yeah.
estate wealth, I mean, many of you and many of your listeners will know how crazy the housing market has been over the last 10, 15 years. It's been really challenging for a lot of folks, but it means these houses have appreciated, and that makes planned giving so important because a lot of the wealth is what we call illiquid, which means you can't actually spend it today. It's in retirement funds, or it's in a home, or it's in a car, or it's in property or other land. And so this is where leaving a charity 20% of uh, of your total estate is just incredibly meaningful. And we hear stories all the time of we talk to a nonprofit and they say, "Well, we just got a $750,000 bequest. The person we looked in our file had only given us $20 before, but they were moved to include us. And we had no idea this was a wealthy person. But because plan giving is so powerful, it changes the course of that organization, certainly for the next few years and maybe for the next 30.
Yeah, absolutely. So in that instance, I think about those that have their CRM systems and they haven't really done a really deep dive into a wealth screening of the individuals that are there so they can get a sense to get ahead of that. I hear often, like you, the surprise bequests that came
Hmm.
in. Requests don't need to be a surprise, I
Right.
don't believe. I think if you do a lot of planning and thought around it and having those conversations early with those donors that are passionate about the work that you do, I think it's really, really important. So walk us through a day in the life of an RD person, a resource development professional that could potentially begin to start this process of looking at bringing plan giving into their house.
Yeah, so it's a great question and a really important one. And there are some pretty achievable steps, right? So the first thing you might want to do is just spend a little bit of time educating yourself on plan giving. And there's lots of great resources out there from lots of organizations. We also provide a bunch of free trainings, and the videos of all of those are on our website. But let's say you've done that a little bit and you're convinced and you know some basic things to do. So here are three steps that might be pretty straightforward. One is make sure you have planned giving prominently on your website so that when people are coming to you thinking about how do we help, what they're
Mhm.
doing is saying, oh, this is an avenue that might be useful. And it might be, I hadn't thought about that. A lot of people, when we talk about planned giving, oh, it never occurred to me to include a charity. So the first thing is making sure the folks who are aware um, can really benefit from that. Now, the second step might be, and by the way, on that, you can either sort of get a really highly customized microsite that might be attached to your website, or you can just put a paragraph on, right? It's better to have more complexity, but if you just want to start today,
Doesn't
get
wear.
that paragraph up there. The
Yeah.
second thing we'd say is um, there is something called Make a Will Month. Make a Will Month is in August. It is an unbelievably great thing to participate. What you want to do is a couple times in August, say, our organization is participating in this. We're reminding folks to do their estate planning. We know that two-thirds of Americans don't have an up-to-date legal will. And by the way, we'd love it if you include us, but you don't have to. So participation in Make a Will Month is great. It's also a really great chance to use email to go broadly. You don't have to overly target your donors here because guess what? Everyone needs an estate plan. Everyone. Small donors, your non-donors, your volunteers, your staff, your board, your big donors, everybody. You, me, right? All of the listeners today, everyone needs an estate plan. So, by the way, as a side note, if you don't have an estate plan, get one. You really need one. Your loved ones will thank you. And then, the third thing is after we get it on our website, um, participate and make a will month. This third bit is we think it's a great, easy avenue is everyone needs to write better thank you notes. And particularly, I'm not just talking about the sort of follow-up 3 days later. The immediate thank you note that when you get a $30 gift automatically gets triggered. Well, take a look at that today. And there's a couple of components of this. One is you want it to feel like an action movie. So it should say, Dear Sharon, thank you for your $30 donation to the Connecticut Food Bank. That money is being put immediately to use today, feeding families across this county and this county and this county, right? And you get that feeling of, wow, I'm having an impact immediately. If you would like to get more involved and no pressure, here are three things you can do. And that might be become a monthly donor. It might be become a volunteer or educate yourself. We really want to have something that is non-monetary. And the third is include us in your will. That you can say
Mhm.
donors from, supporters from 18 to 88 choose to include us in their will, and maybe here's a free resource. So those are some tips that are actually very achievable, right? People think plan giving is much more intimidating than it actually is. And that's true on the donor side and on the nonprofit side.
Absolutely. And for those who are in the room, I've dropped those three steps in the chat. So copy and paste if you need to, and then we'll have the replay as well. Practice that's just like really, really good stuff. What keeps you up at night? What troubles you about all of this? That's one of my favorite go-to questions.
That's a great question. I was talking to someone about this the other day, and I said, and for some people, it's fear of failure, fear of making mistakes, or worried about all the bad things. For me, and this is true in my life, but it's also true in the nonprofit sector, it's fear of missing an incredibly important opportunity. So I think that's really what keeps me up at night. And I know, right, we spend so much time thinking about this great wealth transfer. And it can be the most important moment for nonprofits from a funding perspective in the history of the United States. I mean, it's just so much money transferring. Soon it will be 100 billion, 120 billion dollars a year in bequests going, if not more. In fact, there was just research coming out of CASE, which is a association of higher ed fundraisers.
Mhm.
And last year, so it's already happening. Last year, one in every $4 of individual giving came from a charitable bequest.
Wow.
And there are going to be the haves and the have-nots here. And the haves and the have-nots are not the wealthy nonprofits, not the Stanfords and Harvards of the world versus your local dog shelter. It's the folks that are doing plan giving and reminding their donors about it versus not. And so my heart really goes out to those smaller nonprofits, those medium-sized nonprofits where it's not that hard and it's really important because there's a secret about the great wealth transfer, right? It's all coming from the baby boomers. Baby boomers are the largest and most prosperous generation. And people forget that boomers isn't just the name of a generation. It's also the boom is the number. There were so many folks,
Exactly.
about 40 something million born in the silent generation, 70, 75 million-ish born during boomers, and then only 55 born during Gen X. So the Gen X is actually quite small. And if you depend on older donors, well, when the boomers age and pass away, there's not enough new older donors to fill those shoes until we get
Correct.
to millennials. And some millennials are back up to about 70. And so plan giving is a must for survival. I mean, it's a must for thriving, but it's also going to be a must for survival. And so what keeps me up at night is knowing that some organizations might miss that opportunity.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. That kind of opportunity shift. For me, just in our kind of statistics, we lost about 600 nonprofits that were in our family. We focus a lot on smaller nonprofits,
Sure.
founder-led nonprofits, startups to really help them to go beyond the 3 or 4 years and close their doors. And we lost about 600
Mhm.
because they had one single source of funding, which
Yes.
was grants, and it disappeared overnight. That troubles me, which is why I want to always bring good content, good training to these organizations because there is this, I don't know, there's this scarcity mentality. And so when you talk about these trillions of dollars and billions of dollars, like some people just can't wrap their head around that because I don't know if it's because they're not informed or there is this fear around that. But the practical steps that you laid out to just begin to educate your donors, just dripping little information, having it on your website, those things really make a difference because you never know who's listening, who's looking, who is ready to kind of like turn on that switch. And with that said, what are you finding in terms of, I guess your organizations that you work with across the spectrum, but is there any one thing or that you would think that could help them move from kind of that scarcity, we got to go after that next grant to where the money really is?
Yeah. Well, I would say keep going after that next grant. And, but also just trust that the people who are giving you money actually want to help, right? It's not that there aren't people that care about your cause. If not, they wouldn't be showing up to volunteer. They wouldn't be sending a $20 check every month. I mean, it's already here. And what we need to do is it's our job to make impact as easy as possible for them, right? Nonprofits are the conduit for supporters who want to have impact on the world, but can't walk outside and save the rainforest or can't walk outside and teach a couple thousand children. Um, it's the conduit. And so we need to be, it's our duty to be giving them more ways to help in the ways that are going to really, really matter. So that's what I would say. I think it's just part of the job description is to look for creative ways to really raise some of the big bucks.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I have a couple of organizations that always taunt like they have hundreds of thousands, of followers. But the education around what do you do with that?
What do you do
If
with
you
them?
look at are those followers even giving? No, they're liking,
Yeah.
but have you educated? So these steps that you talk about to really begin to help educate them that these are some ways that you could potentially support us, because maybe everybody can't write a check right off the bat. I don't know,
Right.
but letting them have that opportunity. What other thoughts do you have that you want to share today with us that could really help these organizations move the needle?
Well, I do think that um, it's we're entering a really interesting age in the nonprofit sector, and it's sort of the opposite of what it feels like. So what it
Hmm.
feels like is we're in an increased scarcity mindset. And look, 2025 was a brutal year for nonprofits with the the destruction of USAID, the reduction in grants at the federal level in particular, and overall very challenging. But we are entering a unbelievable era for nonprofits. And a couple of things are happening. One is a lot of that federal grant money got held up, but then it got redistributed to states in the form of block grants. And what that means is that it's more accessible than ever for small and local nonprofits to get state funding in a way they would never have gotten DC funding. And so that's one big opportunity. The second is we've already talked about the Great Wealth Transfer, but I'm just going to say it one more time. Biggest opportunity for philanthropy in your entire lifetime by a huge margin. So that's all coming. And look, the oldest boomers are turning 80 years old in 2026, and the youngest are turning 64. So we're really entering this period, which is really important to understand. And then the third thing is, we talk a lot about AI and what it means for fundraising. And yes, there's a lot of interesting new tools, but one of the most important things is what it means for the economy. And so as you
Mm.
see things like OpenAI and Anthropic start to IPO, I mean, SpaceX is going to create 4,000 new millionaires when it IPOs, I think tomorrow. Um, and so you have a lot of new assets being built. Not a huge spike in income, but a spike in assets. And by the way,
Right.
a lot of organizations, a lot of companies are getting more profitable. What does that mean? It means their stock price is going up. What does that mean is that all your donors who have appreciated assets have more money in their investments, right? Investments are getting more productive than ever compared to income. And so there's a lot of people willing to give that away. In fact, the Anthropic co-founders are aiming to give away 80% of the value of their stock, which, thank you. It's important. And look, no one needs as much money as they're going to receive when they IPO. It doesn't need to happen. And so
Yeah.
um, it's an important element here.
Yeah, absolutely. So for our listeners, one of the questions that came in was just around how to leverage the money once it's in. Like, how do you leverage that?
Sure. Well, it depends on the size, right? So in some days it might just help you hit your annual goal, but when
Mhm.
you get a large gift, right? When you get let's say you're $1 million a year organization and you get an unexpected $650,000 request, or you get four $200,000 requests. You don't want to spend it immediately, right? It's good to start putting it in. Many of you will start to build endowments through these planned gifts, and that will be really useful. But then you start to think structurally, what would we do if we had more revenue? And it's a hard thing for people to think about um, because it almost feels like cheating. But you want to have plans. Look, if we had twice as much money next year, what would we do with it? Are we actually prepared to think about that? And it's a hard exercise because you might not have it. But a lot of organizations now, especially with this IPO boom and some of the increased wealth, really need to think about, hey, what would we do if suddenly our budget was 50% larger? Do we have the ability to deploy that to have the kind of impact we have? Or are there bottlenecks in the organization? And so we really have to start to think in advance. Well, Sharon, you have 200 extra $1,000 next year. What would you do with it? And that's, I think, going to be the really big question in the years ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good exercise to have to really have them start thinking about it right off the top of their head. Um, I can't think of any other questions for you, and I'm sure there's some rolling around. Let me just check the chat to see if there's anything there. Nope. Any other words of wisdom you want to add for us today? Excuse me.
Well, look, I think that for those of you who are in nonprofit fundraising in particular, it's a hard job. It's just a hard job. And it involves being brave. It can be thankless. You get a lot of rejection, but the work you do is so, so important. And it just means a lot to me that, your listeners have come to join Sharon you and join me today to really improve their ability to do that great work. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. And obviously thank you to you, Sharon, for having me. It's such a great platform to be a part of.
Well, you're more than welcome, and thank you for the wealth of knowledge that you bring in. We're all about really helping them to build their infrastructure, look at systems, build out frameworks, and really think strategically about the growth that can happen and preparing for it before it comes, but making sure you said it at the top of the hour. We're all overworked. There is
Sure.
just not enough hours in the day to get it all done. But having a laser focus around what does it mean to build a sustainable nonprofit and what does that look like, and focusing on the main thing and not all of the ancillary things
Yeah.
that really don't matter. And you said it so clearly earlier, which is really, really key. I would love to come up with ways that we can continue to promote what you all do, how people can get the training. I'll make sure they have the link to the resources, also your training for next week, because I think that these are conversations that need to continue to happen. We do also monthly newsletter, and I love to feature this prior to Make a Will Month, so we can
Mm.
get it out to as many folks that we can, because I think that is just going to be really important for them to really understand that this is something they should be thinking about, as well as promoting to their constituents, because it's just really, really important. Um, so what I'm going to do now is share a screen for you all to see how you can connect, excuse me, with Patrick and his team, and really get to their website, ask any questions, just connect with them, because it's a great group that has a wealth of information. I know we're dialed in as an organization to make sure that we begin to implement a number of these steps that he has mentioned, because it's just so key for organizations to understand how to plan and kind of get this right. So, Patrick, before we leave, just could you touch on all of the instruments opposed to DAFs, because the DAFs are exploding. Um, any other instruments that you feel folks are missing, they should really be paying attention to?
Sure.
I mean, I learned about the IPOs, excuse me, today. Didn't know. What should we be thinking about and looking for?
Look, I think there's two other massive types of giving beyond planned giving, which we've already talked about. Donor advised funds are key. It's just so important. It's almost $500 billion that has already been set aside for charity. So what else? IRA giving is exploding. Why is it exploding? It's gifts out of your IRA. It's called a qualified charitable distribution. And you have to be over 70 and a half years old. It's a weird quirk in the law, 70 and a half to give one of these. Well, what's happening? Baby boomer population, 10,000 people are turning 70 and a half every single day. So, and of course, there's almost $20 trillion sitting in IRAs right now. So just enormous, enormous sums. It's so important that you focus on that. And then, of course, stock giving. We just talked about these IPOs, but the benefits to donors of stock giving are enormous in terms of tax savings. And the little secret behind why donor advised funds got so big is because people are giving stock into the donor advised funds. So if you're a nonprofit and you want to think about, well, how do we get some of that directly to us? well, you have to be asking for stock gifts. And so that's a really important tip. And I think people can grumble about donor advised funds, but they're missing the big why it happens. So important point there.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really a pleasure to have you on, but more importantly, the wisdom that you shared with us today. Please know that we will be in contact, excuse me, and continue this dialogue. I think it's really, really key. And I will connect with your team about getting some content for the newsletter because I want everybody to be prepared for Make a Will Month because I think that that's a good first step for those who are really looking to begin to go into this realm of plan giving and diversifying their revenue stream. Patrick, thank you so much for
Amazing.
coming
Thank you,
today. I
Sharon. It's
really,
so
really
nice to meet
appreciate
you.
you. It's so good to meet you, and I'm so excited. You know, I thought about it, was like, how did I find out about free will? I presented at the Faith and Fundraising Conference in
Mm,
February in Chicago, and that's where I met your team. And I
hmm.
just latched on and I kept it in the back of my mind and said, these are people that I want to make sure that get out to our audience and just share the great wealth of knowledge that you all have. So thank you
Great.
again for being here with us today.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much. It's really
You're
great to
more
meet
than
you.
welcome. Okay, take care.
Bye.
Ciao. Okay, you've heard it, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This was an amazing conversation. There are going to be some things on our YouTube channel, as well as in all of our social media links and others of the information that you can receive. So, thank you so much for joining us today. And we are so excited to continue this. This next week, we have an individual that's coming on who is going to be talking about policy. Um, and how policy affects the work that you all do. So Daphne Burke from the Burke Report will be here next Tuesday at 10 o'clock. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. We can be void of what's happening in the world, particularly as policy affects the work that we do. So join us next week. Continue to follow us on all social media, and we will be more than happy to share with you what's coming up